"You there, the roses along the south wall. They need cutting back before the frost takes them." Lyra heard the voice before she saw the man who owned it. Low, unhurried, the kind of voice accustomed to being obeyed without repetition. She was on her knees, in the kitchen garden at the time, her fingers black with soil, her back aching from 2 hours of work she had not been hired to perform. She had been hired to manage the household accounts for Ashvale Park. She had taken up the kitchen garden because the head gardener had vanished with 3 weeks' wages, and no one else appeared to notice the lettuces were drowning. She sat back on her heels and turned. The man standing at the garden gate was tall and broad across the shoulders in the way that suggested he had done real work all his life, and not merely lifted a hunting rifle now and then. His coat was coarse wool, dark green, worn at the left elbow. His boots were mud-caked to the ankle. He had a pruning knife tucked through his belt, and his fair skin was sun-touched at the cheekbones and the back of the neck, in the manner of a man who spent more hours outdoors than in. His hair was dark brown, cut short, and there was a scar along his jaw, pale and old. "I'm the accounts clerk," Lyra said, "not the undergardener." He looked at her steadily. He did not apologize. He did not look away. "The roses," he said again, and turned and walked toward the stable block. She stared after him for a moment. The morning was cold. Her knees were wet from the soil. She thought about the ledger waiting on the desk inside, with its 3 columns of figures that did not reconcile, and then she thought about the way the south wall roses were already blackening at the tips, and she got up, found the shears hanging inside the potting shed door, and went to cut them back. That was the 1st of October. It was also, though she did not know it then, the first time she had done something simply because Marek Ashvale asked her to. There is a particular cruelty in being reduced slowly, not in a single blow, which at least has the mercy of speed, but incrementally, over months, until the morning arrives when you cannot remember clearly who you were before the reduction began. Lyra Voss had arrived at Ashvale Park in the 2nd week of September, with a trunk of sensible dresses, a leather-bound copy of Cocker's Arithmetic, and a letter of reference from the late Sir Edmund Voss of Wiltshire, her father, who had been dead 11 months, and whose estate had been swallowed entirely by debt she had not known existed until the solicitor read the will. The letter was genuine. The position was genuine. What was not genuine was any pretense, on the part of Lady Hargrove, who had engaged her, that the post was what it had been advertised to be. Lyra had been promised a private office, a reasonable working day of 9 to 5, management of the household accounts, and a wage of £42 per annum. What she received, a shared room in the east wing above the laundry, which was always either too hot or too cold, depending on whether the boiler was working, and a ledger system, so deliberately obfuscated that she spent the first 2 weeks simply establishing what year the entries had last been honest. Lady Hargrove was not the mistress of Ashvale Park. She was the widow of a second cousin to the estate's true owner, installed as housekeeper in all but name during what everyone referred to, with careful vagueness, as the owner's absence. She was a narrow woman with colorless eyes and a habit of appearing silently in doorways. She had dismissed 4 accounts clerks in 18 months. She told Lyra this on the 2nd morning, cheerfully. Over tea she did not offer to share. "The last one had opinions," Lady Hargrove said. "I cannot abide opinions in a clerk." Lyra had said nothing. She had written £42 per annum in very small letters at the top of her personal notebook, underlined it once, and gone back to the ledger. The ledger was a chronicle of small corruptions. Supplies invoiced twice. Tradesmen's bills paid in full against receipts that showed a negotiated discount had been secured. The discount never credited back to the household account. Coal deliveries recorded for quantities 3/4 again what was noted in the receiving log. It was the work of years, not months, and it was cautious enough that any single entry, examined alone, might have been attributed to carelessness. Lyra did not examine entries alone. She cross-referenced. She built a parallel ledger in her private notebook with columns for recorded, actual, and variance. By the 15th of September, the variance column ran to 4 pages. She told no one. There was no one to tell. The senior footman reported to Lady Hargrove. The cook was frightened of Lady Hargrove. The 2 housemaids were cousins of Lady Hargrove's from somewhere in Kent. She was alone in the accounts office on the morning of the 20th of September when she heard a knock at the window rather than the door, which was unusual, and looked up to find the tall man in the green coat standing on the other side of the glass, pointing at something behind her. She turned. A candle she had forgotten had tipped in its holder, and the edge of a paper was beginning to brown. She killed it with her palm. She turned back. He was gone. She went back to her ledger. She began to see him regularly after that. He was the groundskeeper, or so the household called him, in the abbreviated way of servants who do not bother to specify first names. Simply, the groundskeeper, Marek. He cut the grass. He repaired the dry stone walls along the eastern boundary. He replaced 2 rotting fence posts on the north meadow. He was in the kitchen garden most mornings, and she passed him when she walked to the house from her room in the east wing. He never greeted her. She never greeted him. But he had a habit, she noticed, of being present when things went slightly wrong. The east wing corridor window that stuck and let in the cold fixed one morning without anyone having asked. The loose step on the back stair she had mentioned to no one, repaired between her going up at 10 and coming down at 7 the following morning. She did not think about this overmuch. She had a variance column to maintain. In the last week of October, Lady Hargrove called her into the sitting room, the good one, and sat very straight in the wing-backed chair by the fire and said, "I understand you have been auditing receipts going back to 1887. "I have been reconciling the ledger," Lyra said. "That is what I was engaged to do." "The ledger," Lady Hargrove said, "has been satisfactorily maintained." Lyra said nothing. "I would prefer," Lady Hargrove said, "that your attentions remain focused on the current quarter. The historical entries are settled. They do not require your revision. The entries for the coal account," Lyra said, "reflect a discrepancy of approximately £237 over 4 years. I have the delivery receipts and the receiving log." The fire popped. Outside, somewhere distant, a rook called. Lady Hargrove's colorless eyes did not change. "You are, of course, at liberty to pursue whatever inquiry you feel appropriate," she said, very gently, very pleasantly. "And I am, of course, at liberty to provide a reference that accurately reflects the quality and temperament of a clerk who spent her first month in service digging up kitchen gardens and making accusations." Lyra held the woman's gaze for a count of 5. Then she said, "Good morning," and left. She went back to her office. She sat down. She put her hands flat on the desk for a moment, because they were shaking slightly, not with fear. She identified it precisely. She had learned to identify these things precisely, but with a clean, focused rage. She did not go to anyone. She did not weep. She opened her private notebook to a fresh page, wrote the date at the top in her small, deliberate hand, and began to construct, carefully, the full formal account. £237. That was a fraction. That was the coal account only. She had not yet added the grocer, the candle maker, or the wine merchant. It was a Friday afternoon in the first week of November when she came to a conclusion. She had enough. She had a complete parallel ledger running from January of 1887 to the present day, with supporting documentation, copies she had made, carefully, of the most critical receipts, and the total variance was £614 across 11 separate accounts. £614. Her father's entire income in his last solvent year had been £520. The number sat in her chest like a stone. She would take it to a solicitor. She would need to leave Ashvale Park to do it. She would need a reference to find another position. She did not have a reference she could ask Lady Hargrove for. She had the letter from her father's estate, 11 months old. She was thinking about this, standing at the window of her office with the gray November sky making the garden look like a steel engraving, when the door opened without a knock, and Lady Hargrove entered with 2 men Lyra did not recognize. Both of them were in good coats. One of them had the look of a solicitor. The other had a constable's bearing without a constable's uniform. "Miss Voss," Lady Hargrove said pleasantly, "I am afraid we have a matter of some concern. It appears that certain receipts from the household files have gone missing." Lyra did not move from the window. "I have not removed any receipts from the household files." "Nevertheless," Lady Hargrove said. She looked at the copies in her desk drawer. She looked at Lady Hargrove. She looked at the 2 men. She picked up her notebook. "I should like to leave," she said. "I'm afraid," Lady Hargrove said. That will not be possible this afternoon. The door was blocked. One of the men had taken up a position near it. Not threatening, not quite, just present. Lyra turned back to the window. The garden was empty. The south wall roses were bare now, cut back 6 weeks ago, brown sticks against pale stone. The kitchen garden was mulched and put to bed. The sky was the color of old pewter. And then the door at the far end of the garden, the door in the north wall that she had never seen opened, that she had assumed was decorative or blocked on the other side, swung wide. Merrick walked through it, not the measured, unhurried walk she knew from the mornings in the kitchen garden. Something different, deliberate, direct. He was still wearing the green coat. He still had mud on his boots. But there was a man walking behind him, and that man was in town clothes, carrying a leather case, and moving at a near trot to keep up. Merrick did not come to her office window. He walked to the house's main entrance. She heard, a few moments later, the sound of the front door opening. She heard Lady Hargrove hear it too. She watched the woman's expression change. Not much, just a fractional tightening around the eyes and mouth, and she heard Lady Hargrove say to the man near the door, quietly, "Go and see," and she watched him go. The room was quieter then. Lady Hargrove remained. The second man remained. Lyra remained at the window with her notebook in her hands. She did not know, yet, who Merrick was. She knew the moment was turning. She did not know which way. The door opened a minute later. It was not the man who had left. It was Merrick. He came in without knocking, which no servant did, and behind him was the man with the leather case, and behind him was the household's senior footman, who was very white in the face. Merrick looked at Lady Hargrove. He did not look at the man with the case. He did not look at Lyra. Not yet. "You may sit down," he said to Lady Hargrove. Lady Hargrove did not sit down. "I don't know what you think you are. You may sit," Merrick said, "or you may stand. But either way, you will not speak again until I ask you to." The quality of his voice in that moment was different from every previous time Lyra had heard it. It was not louder. It was quieter. It occupied the room entirely. Lady Hargrove sat. The man with the leather case placed it on Lyra's desk and opened it. He produced a document, very official-looking, with a wax seal at the bottom that caught the light. "Miss Voss," Merrick said, and now he looked at her. His eyes were gray, she noticed, very pale gray, the color of the sky outside the window. She had not been close enough before to notice. "The letter in Mr. Hartwell's case is a formal power of attorney for the management of this estate's accounts. I should have had it sent 3 months ago. I apologize." Lyra looked at him. She looked at the document. She looked back at him. "Who are you?" she said. Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile. Something adjacently amused and adjacently rueful. "Merrick Ashvale," he said. "This is my house." Of all the things she had expected him to say, that was not among them. She had imagined, in the weeks since she had begun to notice him, a dozen versions of who he might be. A steward acting above his station, a relation of the estate visiting informally, a man of independent means who had some arrangement with the property. She had not imagined this. She looked at the mud on his boots. She looked at the scar on his jaw. She said, "Why?" He considered this. "Because I needed to understand what was happening here, without the actors knowing they were being observed. I had suspicions about the household accounts before I arrived. It was simpler to confirm them as a groundskeeper than to announce myself and watch everyone perform innocence." "You have been here for 8 weeks, Lyra said. "Yes. You repaired the step on the back stair. It was a hazard." "You have been." She stopped. She recalibrated. She looked at Lady Hargrove, who had gone the color of uncooked pastry, and then back at Merrick. "Your account," she said, "is approximately 6 months short of the full picture. The variance I have documented runs to £614. A pause. "I had estimated 400. 412, Lyra said, "if you stop at the wine merchant. But the wine merchant is not where it ends." Merrick looked at Mr. Hartwell. Mr. Hartwell looked, with considerable interest, at Lyra's notebook. "May I?" Mr. Hartwell said. She handed it over. She watched him open it, read the first page, turned to the second. look up at her over the pages with an expression she recognized as professional respect, because she had not seen it directed at her in long enough that it took a moment to name. "This is," he said, "comprehensive." "It is complete," Lyra said. "To yesterday." She did not look at Lady Hargrove again until Merrick turned to the woman and said flatly, "Mr. Hartwell will require access to every file in the house. You will provide it." "I don't see that I am obliged." "You are obliged," Merrick said. "To a great deal more than that. And we will discuss the full extent of your obligations after Mr. Hartwell has finished, and after I have arranged for the county magistrate to join us. Whether the arrangements involve a civil remedy or a criminal one is entirely dependent on your cooperation in the next 2 hours." The room was very quiet. Lady Hargrove stood. She was rigid. She was pale. She had the look of a woman recalculating very rapidly. "The county magistrate," she said, "is a personal friend." "The county magistrate," Merrick said, "owes me £1,100 on a note of hand from 1889. I do not expect his friendship to survive that reminder, Mr. Hartwell." The man near the door, Lady Hargrove's man, had gone at some point during the conversation. The footman remained, white-faced, near the wall. Lady Hargrove looked once more at Lyra, a look that contained several things Lyra did not bother to catalogue, and then left with Mr. Hartwell. Merrick remained. Lyra sat down. She did it carefully, because her legs had made a quiet decision that they were finished with standing, while her head had not yet caught up, and it was preferable to sit deliberately than to discover she needed to sit urgently. "Your notebook," Merrick said. "How long did that take to compile?" "From the 15th of September to yesterday." He nodded slowly. He looked at his hands. He had a laborer's hands, she thought. Large, well-used, knuckles scarred from something that was not accounting. An unlikely Duke's hands, except that she supposed Dukes had all sorts of hands. "You were going to leave," he said, not a question. "Today," Lyra said. "I had decided this morning. I was going to take the notebook to a solicitor in the village." "You had no reference." "I have my father's letter. From his estate. Sir Edmund Voss," Merrick said. She looked up sharply. "I know of your father," he said. "He was known well in Wiltshire. I am sorry for your loss." She had not expected that. She had not expected to hear those words said plainly, without the practiced condolence tone that people used when they had not known the person and were merely observing form. He said it as a fact. She was sorry for your loss the way he said the roses needed cutting, because it was true, and it needed saying, and he did not see the point of ornamentation. She looked at the window, the pewter sky, the bare brown sticks of the south wall roses. "He would have found this situation very interesting," she said, after a moment. "He kept meticulous accounts. He was not meticulous about much else, it turned out." She had not said that out loud before, not to anyone. It sat in the air of the office, blunt and insufficient, a year's worth of grief compressed into a single dry sentence. Marek said nothing. He did not offer a correction or a comfort. He simply waited, in the way he had of waiting, which was not impatient. "I should like," Lyra said, "to continue the work. To its conclusion, I should like to see the ledger properly reconciled." He looked at her. "What I mean," she said, more carefully, "is that if there is a position here, a legitimate one, properly structured, for the management of the estate's accounts, I should like to be considered for it. Not as a concession, not as a courtesy, on the basis of the work." The silence stretched for 3 seconds. 4. "The position," Merrick said, "pays £60 per annum, includes a private office, and reports directly to the estate's principal. There is no Lady Hargrove in the reporting structure." "There is not," Lyra agreed. "Then yes," he said, "on the basis of the work." The following days arranged themselves differently from anything that had come before them. Lady Hargrove departed on the Thursday, with Mr. Hartwell and a formal letter of agreement that Lyra was not privy to, though Mr. Hartwell told her, quietly, as he left, that the civil remedy had prevailed, and the matter would not require the county magistrate after all. Lady Hargrove had signed an acknowledgment of the full variance, amended upward, after the file review, to £702, and had agreed to restitution on a schedule of her choosing, in exchange for the matter remaining outside the criminal courts. £702. Lyra wrote it in her notebook under a new heading, Resolved. She underlined it twice. Ashvale Park, without Lady Hargrove in it, was a different house. It breathed. The housemaids stopped moving, like people expecting to be scolded. The cook made a soup that was, without explanation, significantly better than every previous soup. The footman, whose name was Thomas, and who had been quietly miserable for 14 months, smiled for the first time in Lyra's experience, and then seemed surprised by his own face. Merrick continued, for the first week after, to present himself in the coat and boots she associated with the groundskeeper. She did not comment on this. It was his house. He could wear what he liked. She noticed that he was, in fact, continuing the work he had been doing, the North Meadow fences, the kitchen garden's winter preparation, and she suspected that this was not performance, but simply who he was, when no one was requiring him to be a duke. On the 9th day after Lady Hargrove's departure, Merrick appeared at the door of her office in something approaching proper clothes. Still plain, dark wool, well cut but unornamented, no cravat pin, no signet on his hand, though she had noted a faint mark on his right ring finger that suggested the ring was sometimes there. He looked in these clothes exactly as formidable as he looked in the green coat, which was not less. "There will be guests," he said from the doorway. "3 of them. They arrive Thursday. They are friends of my sister's, and I owe them a house visit, and I would prefer to discharge the debt before Christmas." "Very well," Lyra said. She looked back at her ledger. "They will also," he said, "very likely ask questions about the household and its management. My sister has written ahead, apparently, and told them what was found here. She has a talent for communication that exceeds all requirements." Lyra set down her pen. "What kind of questions?" she said. "The kind people ask," he said, "when they are determining whether a situation is respectable. The 3 are Lady Pemberton, her husband the Viscount, and Lady Pemberton's mother, who is 73 years old and has opinions about everything, and no inclination to keep them private." "You are asking me," Lyra said slowly, "whether I will stay through Thursday. I am informing you of the situation," Merrick said. "What you do with the information is yours to determine." He was not asking. He was not, she noticed, pretending not to be asking either. He was simply making the information available and trusting her to make a decision with it. It was, she thought, an unusual way to want something from a person. "I will stay," she said. "The quarterly report is due the 20th in any case." He nodded. He left. She looked at the empty doorway for a moment, then picked up her pen. The days before Thursday were clean and productive in a way that the previous 8 weeks had not been. Lyra moved through the house like a woman in her proper element, which she supposed she was, not the kitchen garden, which had been expedient necessity, but the columns and receipts and the satisfying architecture of a ledger that was, at last, being built honestly. She organized the wine cellar's invoice record. She corrected the grocer's standing account. She found, in a box in the back of the filing cabinet, a set of receipts from 1885 and 1886 that predated Lady Hargrove's tenure entirely, and cross-referencing them, confirmed that the household had been run at a modest surplus before Lady Hargrove's arrival. She put this summary on Merrick's desk on the Wednesday morning. She did not knock, because the door was open and he was not in the room. She left it on top of the estate map he had spread there, and did not think about his hands, or the pale gray of his eyes, or the thing he had said about her father. She thought about it later, walking back down the corridor. She thought, 11 months of managing grief by managing everything else, by being cold and precise and useful, and a man who had been a duke disguised as a groundskeeper had said, "I am sorry for your loss, the way you say something you mean." She thought, her father had kept meticulous accounts. She had his hands for figures, his mother had always said. She had not let herself think about that in 11 months. She stood in the corridor for a moment, with her forehead nearly against the cold plaster of the wall. Just for a moment. Then she straightened up and went back to the office. The guests arrived on Thursday morning in a carriage that announced itself by its wheels on the gravel drive, long before Lyra looked up from the east window to see it. Lady Pemberton was a tall woman, fair-skinned and sharp-eyed, with the look of someone who had been beautiful in her youth and had decided that continuing to be beautiful into middle age was simply a matter of will, The Viscount was genial and went immediately to look at the horses. Lady Pemberton's mother, a Mrs. Caldecott, Lyra learned, was small and white-haired and had been deposited from the carriage like an elegant parcel and was now standing in the entrance hall looking at everything with the frank appraisal of a woman who has stopped pretending she is not looking. Lyra was introduced as the estate's accounts manager. Lady Pemberton said, "Oh yes, Merrick's told us," in a way that meant something beyond its surface. Mrs. Caldecott looked at Lyra from under white brows and said, "How old are you, girl?" 24, Lyra said. "And you found £700 in the cookbooks." "The household accounts," Lyra said. 702. Mrs. Caldecott made a sound that was either approval or digestion. Dinner that evening was the first time since the day Lady Hargrove had sat in the good sitting room and threatened her reference that Lyra had felt the particular chill of being assessed by people with power over her circumstances. She had been invited to dine. Merrick had told her this the way he told her things, flatly, as a statement of what would occur, and she had put on her second-best dress, which was gray wool with a white collar, and reminded herself that she had the variance column in her notebook and £614 cross-referenced to the receipt. Lady Pemberton asked, over the soup, how long Lyra had been at Ashvale. "Since the second week of September," Lyra said. "And you managed the accounts all this time without guidance?" "There was no guidance available," Lyra said. "I managed with the receipts and the ledger." "Alone," Lady Pemberton said. "Entirely." A silence. Then Lady Pemberton looked at Merrick and said, "She's rather wonderful," in the tone of someone confirming a prior suspicion. Marek looked at his soup. "She is thorough," he said. Mrs. Caldecott, unprompted, said, "When I was 24, I had been married 4 years and had 3 children, and I still could not have found £700 in a ledger. I consider it a character attribute." The Viscount came back in from wherever he had gone with the wine decanter and said, "What did I miss?" "Nothing," Lady Pemberton said. "Everything." The days of that visit, it ran 5 nights, not 3, because the weather turned, settled something in Ashvale Park that Lyra could not have named precisely, but felt in the way a house changes its quality when the people in it stop performing and begin simply being. She worked mornings. She walked the grounds in the afternoons because November had turned sharp and still, and the estate was, she was discovering, very beautiful in the stripped-down austerity of late autumn. She saw Merrick most days. He was still in the coat, more often than not in the mornings. He had a habit of working alongside people. She saw him help the stable hand with something involving a fence post that had rotted through, saw him carry materials for the reglazing of the north kitchen window. That struck her as either very unusual for a duke or entirely characteristic of this particular one, and she could not determine which. She was crossing the kitchen garden on the 4th morning of the visit when he fell into step beside her. "Mr. Hartwell wrote," he said. "The settlement schedule is confirmed. First payment in January." "Good," she said. They walked a few steps in silence. "Lady Pemberton," he said, "has asked me whether your position here is permanent." Lyra stopped walking. "What did you tell her?" "That the position is open for as long as you want it." The cold air moved between them. There were ice crystals on the brown stalks of the kitchen garden, very fine, catching the flat morning light. "That is not quite an answer to her question," Lyra said. He looked at her. That steady, gray-eyed look she had learned over 2 months to distinguish from blankness. It was not blankness. It was a man who had decided the things he said should mean something, and so said fewer of them. "No," he said, "it is not." She waited. "What I should have said," he said, "and what I will now say, is that I would prefer you to stay, not as a courtesy, not as a concession." He used her words back to her. "Because the work is excellent, and because—" He stopped. He looked away, briefly, at the bare south wall where the roses had been. "Because this house is better when you're in it." It was 11 words at the end. 11 simple words with the green coat and the mud-caked boots and the scar on his jaw, and 11 months of Lyra's grief sitting in her chest like a stone that was, she realized, just slightly lighter than it had been the morning before. She did not let herself look away from him. "I should like to say something about the terms," she said. The terms. My wage is £60. I should like it raised to 75 in the spring if the quarterly accounts satisfy. I should like a formal letter of engagement, executed by Mr. Hartwell, establishing the scope and authority of my position. And I should like it understood. She paused. She chose her words the way she cross-referenced receipts, with care, with exactness, with no room for ambiguity. I should like it understood that I am here because I am good at this work, and that whatever else develops between us, if anything does, it develops from that, not instead of it. She did not look away. He did not look away. Understood, he said. The word was quiet and precise, and he meant it entirely. She nodded. She looked at the south wall. She thought about the roses that would come back in May, red-tipped and vigorous, because she had cut them back in October, in the mud, before she knew whose house this was, or who had told her to. The letter of engagement, she said, by the end of the month. Before Christmas, he said. End of the month, she said. The corner of his mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. It was the closest thing to one she had yet seen on him, and it rearranged the geography of his face entirely. End of the month, he agreed. November burned down to its last week in clear, cold days, with frost on the grass each morning, and wood smoke in the air by afternoon. Lady Pemberton departed, and Mrs. Caldecott, and the genial Viscount, who had spent the better part of 5 days looking at horses. The house settled back into its own quiet. It was a different quiet from before, not the pressed-down silence of Lady Hargrove's rule, but the natural quiet of a place that does not need noise to prove itself. Lyra finished the quarterly accounts on the 19th. They showed a surplus of £41 after all outstanding household debts were serviced, the first surplus this estate had recorded since the autumn of 1886. She placed the summary on Marek's desk, with the supporting figures. She found, when she went back to her office, a letter on her own desk, Mr. Hartwell's letterhead. Her name on the outside. She sat down. She opened it. It was a letter of engagement, formal and complete, establishing her role as accounts manager of the Ashvale Park estate, with full authority over household and estate finances, reporting to the principal owner. The wage was £75 per annum. She turned to the date. It was the 18th. He had sent to Mr. Hartwell the day before yesterday. She looked at this for a moment. Then she folded the letter, placed it in her personal notebook between the page that said resolved, underlined twice, and the new page she had started with the heading January, and went back to work. The 28th of November was a Sunday, which meant no tradespeople, no deliveries, and a morning that unfolded without urgency. Lyra walked the full boundary of the kitchen garden because she had been thinking about what should go in the eastern bed come spring, and wanted to look at the drainage. The frost had come and gone in the night, and left the grass silver white in the shadows, and the air had the particular sharp sweetness of a cold, clear morning that smells of nothing except cold and clean. Marek was at the north wall, replacing a stone that had shifted in the last frost. She had stopped being surprised by this. She stopped walking near him and looked at what he was doing. The mortar wants to be reset on the full section, she said. If you only reset that one stone, it will go again before February. He looked at the wall. He looked at her. He said, I know. Then why? Because I am doing this one today, he said, and the rest of the section Thursday. She considered this logic. It was, she decided, not unreasonable. She stood beside him while he worked. The sun came over the east wing roof and fell across the garden in long, pale stripes. Her breath made small, brief clouds in the cold air. Somewhere across the meadow, a wood pigeon was calling, low and monotonous and oddly content. She was thinking about the eastern bed and whether leaks would manage the drainage, and she was thinking about the letter in her notebook, and she was thinking about 11 months, and a stone in her chest, and the way grief is a kind of ledger too, with its own columns for what was lost and what remains. She did not say any of this. She did not need to. Marek finished setting the stone and stood up and brushed mortar off his hands. He turned and looked at her with those pale gray eyes in the pale winter light. Thursday, she said, for the rest of the section. Thursday, he said. And they walked back together through the kitchen garden and into the house, and the morning went on quietly around them, full of small, ordinary details. The smell of wood smoke, the sound of their boots on the stone path, the bare brown sticks of the south wall roses against the pale sky, already forming the first faint nodes that would become, in May, new growth. You have known, perhaps, what it is to want something you did not trust yourself to name, because naming it seemed like the most dangerous possible thing. You have known the particular patience of a person who has decided that the only honest foundation is the work itself, and that whatever is built on top of it must be built the same way, stone by stone, receipt by receipt, with no variance unaccounted for. Lyra had her letter. She had her £75. She had a ledger that balanced, finally, and a house that breathed, and a man who had fixed the step on the back stair before she ever knew his name, and who had said, "I am sorry for your loss, the way you say the thing you mean." The stone in her chest was not gone, but it was lighter, and in the garden, in the cold, clear light, with the whole long, honest year of spring still ahead of them, lighter was enough.